Welcome to That Entrepreneur Life, a podcast about entrepreneurship that takes you from idea to launch and beyond. Each week, your hosts, 𝗂𝗲𝗄𝗏 and 𝗞𝗪𝗀𝗻, discuss different business topics aimed at adding value to any entrepreneur's journey.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of That Entrepreneur Life. I'm 𝗂𝗲𝗄𝗏, and I've got my co-host 𝗞𝗪𝗀𝗻 here. What's up, man? How you doing today?
Not much, man. Just glad to be back on the show. Glad to kick another episode off. And it's just, being an entrepreneur is awesome, right? Every day is a new journey. It seems like the curveballs that come, but
oh yeah,
just to add to that, man, just awesome. And we've got a very special guest on the show today. That's going to continue with the great guest of individual we've had on the past. He's a serial entrepreneur in the tech space and is now the CEO of a digital marketing company that uses AI. Stick around if you want to learn more about how AI can streamline your marketing and sales. But before I introduce our special guest today, I want to remind you to subscribe to our podcast and to our mailing list through our website so you don't miss out on all the free resources we have to help you start and grow your business. With that said, I'd like to welcome our guest today, Saedi, to the show. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you, Thomas. Great to meet you both, Andrew and Thomas. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for being on the show, David. I'm very excited to dig in and learn about your entrepreneurial journey and what you're up to now.
Great.
Yeah. So David, just like Andrew said, in learning about your entrepreneurial journey, there's always a question we ask all of our guests that come onto the show. And it's really simple. Can you take us back to your entrepreneurial journey and when it started and what it is about entrepreneurship that really gets you fired up?
Good question. I think, you don't wake up one day and say, I want to be an entrepreneur. It kind of sort of happens through that journey. They say, well, I could do this better. Or have they thought about this? Or have they thought about that? And I was lucky enough at the beginning of my journey to be recruited by a company out in Portland, Oregon, that was a global company. And what they did was to purchase technology companies that were not necessarily doing so well and understanding their components and then figuring out what else could we do with these components. So really, that was the beginning of my journey into understanding that there are different applications that an individual, an inventor may not have thought of. And by pulling these pieces apart and understanding the functions of each of those pieces, you could create brand new companies, brand new concepts, brand new products. Just as an example, we bought a company out in Dallas, Texas, and it had the ability to create brand new chips, which were gallium arsenide chips. And because of the inability to absorb all the heat that they created while they're functioning, the company could not get into the computers as the computer race was going on in the 70s and early 80s. So what we did was to repurpose this particular chip and create night vision goggles, which we then gave to the United States government. So basically, the entrepreneur's vision was surrounding us in that company. Everybody was an entrepreneur. We were always thinking about what else could we do with this? What else could we do with that? And who else could use this technology better than we could? And so from those standpoints, my journey began right there and then, where, Intel had big properties out there in Beaverton, Oregon, and a lot of high-tech companies were actually starting to move from California also into the Oregon area and Portland area. So that was the beginning of it all. And then it became a cultural thing for me because it resonated with my own personality of being inquisitive all the time, figuring out that, while this particular product has this purpose today, could it be used differently? And that really is the kickoff to this style of operations that I've been involved with from then on.
Yeah, it's really interesting to be able to look at something and figure out, hey, what else could this be used for? Because I'm sure there's a lot of companies out there who are maybe trying to knock on the wrong market, sector. Like they might really want to apply their technology, their product to a certain market and solve a certain problem, but maybe with the same product exactly, or maybe with a similar product that's just tweaked a little bit, they can do much better applying it to something else. So I think that's really interesting. you don't necessarily have to say, well, because that chip didn't apply well to computers, didn't necessarily mean that it was just dead. Like, this isn't something we can use for anything. It's really, really cool how you can go in there and understand what the other applications are and capitalize on that.
Dead right, Andrew. I think the idea that something that is applied in one place can also be applied in different places for a completely different purpose is very, very important, because that application allows you to think outside the box, think laterally, and figure out, are we using this particular functionality to its best use? And where else could it be applied?
Yeah. So, would you recommend that kind of analysis and testing is done earlier on, where, like, let's say you have a product that meets a certain need in a market and it's actually doing pretty well. Like, you don't necessarily have to pivot or have to use it for another application, but is it better to just kind of focus on that one, that initial application, and then as that gets traction, then grow? Or do you think it's better early on to figure out, hey, what are the other applications here, and let's test it, because maybe there's something, even though the product works well in this, for this solution, for this market, maybe there's a better fit? That's
an interesting question. What I would say is, if I were dealing with that product, what I want to do is to push that product to its limit from where we stand inside our own company, because getting distracted is a big problem. Focus is extremely important. And so usually you find products that have already been developed and you find derivatives of those products that can be better used in a different area. But I would not necessarily say the same person needs to focus on this, because each individual has to push that product to its limit. So if I were to start that, I would want to make sure that we are using it to the greatest advantage in our own field. Now, there's nothing to stop other people from doing it. Now, when a product comes to a certain part of its own life cycle, and you've done virtually all that you could with this product, the next generations are already being developed and incremental improvements are being made, then it is time for you then to say, okay, is there another product that can do this better today? Because this product could be replaced. Or can this product be pushed into a completely different set of circumstances and serve a different part of the industry or part of the market? I think that thought process needs to be continuous.
I like that. Yeah, I think I'd agree with that. And that focus is so important, especially in the beginning, when there's a million things to figure out and you're just trying to get some traction with one, with your initial product, and you really just need to kind of dial that in first, push that to its limit, and then expand from there. I like that.
I love the message that both of y'all are pushing across, right? I mean, it's like one of those things, as an entrepreneur, we have to pivot at times, and we have to push the envelope, and we have to think outside the box. Thinking outside the box is huge, right? You can't just throw the towel in. You might have a great product again, but at that specific point in time, it serves no purpose for what you wanted it to initially. But now that you can pull something from it and it can stay, and you can still utilize it to your advantage by thinking outside the box and making it in hopping lanes, right? And so I just love that it's one of those things, you don't throw the towel in until the towel needs to be thrown in, right? You look at it, and like you said, David, it might not be your specific focus, but while I'm focusing all the way to the end of the road, then you can get somebody else in the lane that can see, how can we apply this same tool or this same product and use it to our advantage to keep this thing going. Because again, I mean, you might be able to find several different avenues for that product to thrive in, and it might not be the one that you thought at the beginning of the whole journey.
Right. Exactly. You're dead on.
100%. So, David, you're speaking my language with product development and all that kind of stuff. I own a product development firm. I do mechanical, electromechanical, a lot of consumer type products. So I'm really curious, from your perspective, what do you think the most misunderstood thing about product development is? From, let's say somebody has an idea and they want to build a business, a product around it. But they've never done it before. What's the most misunderstood thing, do you think?
If they've never done it before, I think that for product development, the core idea is there has got to be a problem you're fixing. Products that focus on a particularly simple problem can still do a great job in advancing that product forward, that concept forward. But a lot of times we find that the problems that people are facing and living with are not even spoken out clearly. So the job of market research, listening to the market, So if you are in a given sector of the market, understanding every single problem, no matter how small, no matter how large, then the idea should come from right there. How do we fix that problem? And, there are very few times when you have a brand new idea for a brand new concept that never existed before, and you want to push it into the market. That is an extremely difficult thing, obviously. Creating a market where it never existed before is the toughest thing in the world to do.
Yeah, definitely.
And we actually helped. Microsoft had this problem, and you probably read that in my background, that they had tried to create something that had not taken off twice by this giant Microsoft. And the reason for that was very obvious to me, because when you do startups and you do things from scratch, you do them very, very differently than a giant like Microsoft might want to do. So they didn't get the market right, because they were telling us our product, which at the time was the Office products, had 250 million user base around the world. So their idea was, since we had introduced a level of certification and professionalism around usage of products, why wouldn't we do that with consumers? Nobody had ever done it before. So after their second try, which cost them another $1 million of losses, they came to us and said, you guys have done this before for the back-end office, for training people who fix computers and those kinds of stuff. Can you do something for us? And I was called in, and I kicked some ideas around, and I said, I think we can do this. They didn't get the market right, because market should be split into multiple pieces. It is not just the commercial use in offices that need to be looking at. You also need to be looking at full industries and governments adopting it, and then also bring it back down to the educational establishments, so that when you graduate people, they have the skills to use these particular kinds of products. So it had a very, very long journey. And I convinced my investors that we'll take a minimum of 5 years to do this. Within 3 years, we got the product to the market, and we were in probably about 60 countries at the time in our 5th year. And then we ended up in 148 countries around the world. Super successful. Wow. But the point of this is that there is a journey that has to start with listening to the market. And if the market is not telling you that we need people with those skills, well, you can't go and force people with those skills into the market. So we have to listen. Where is the most acute area where the market is suffering? I caused the education to wake up, by the way, because they were saying, okay, we won't be able to teach these people because it's got a brand on it. We don't want to teach Microsoft Word to these people. And I had to go one by one, talk to the entire group at universities and help them understand, if you do not graduate these people with the right skills, once they're employed, they have to learn those skills. So what is the use of the education in that field? So one at a time, I had to convince them. Then, of course, it took off massively. And right now, it's part of the curriculum in every school. But that is what we did, and what was creating a market where one didn't exist. But we had the backing of the 250 million user base that was out there. But we had to convince commercial entities, the virtual offices, not virtual, but all the offices around the world, that if you are hiring people, wouldn't you be happy to have these people skilled up front? So we started there and ended up in schools. And right now, 5-year-olds are using PowerPoint to present to their parents. So
it's working. Yeah. I mean, there's a huge need for it, but just because there's a need for it doesn't mean that it's easy. You can connect the dots very easily.
You said it, Andrew. Navigation of this is extremely important. Where do you start? Where do you go next? How do you convince the next group to do what you want them to do rather than what they're already used to doing? And how ingrained is this adoption of new stuff in the minds of the market that you're targeting? Because some markets are ready for adoption of a lot of things, and other markets are resistant. So understanding those things through listening and testing things out is extremely important.
Yeah. And you said it, listen to your customers. I mean, that's so important. I tell people I work with all the time that one of the when you have an idea, the first thing you want to do is market research and stress test your idea. Don't be afraid to pretend like you're trying to figure out what all the problems could be with it and why it won't work. And when you do that, then you end up with you either end up saying, maybe that wasn't such a great idea, or you end up with a much better idea.
Exactly.
So,
and usually the better idea lies in testing the original idea to its limit.
Yep.
And yeah.
Love that. Yeah.
I really think it solidifies it in the end.
Yeah.
So David, with all that said, man, let's talk a little bit about WinnowPro, and how it can help with digital marketing. I know inside my agency, I've teamed and partnered with your team, and not only let's talking about it and how it helps with digital marketing, but also if we can answer another question up front, is it just for agencies like myself, or can brands use it as well?
Yes. The answer is that we have created an approach to the market that is usable by sectors of the market, as well as the agencies that are serving those sectors. For example, your own agency right now, because you have many different clients, and the kind of products or services that we are creating continuously tend to serve the critical needs that you have. The needs most likely are going to be focused on data and understanding what's going on in your own environment and how to do it better and how to reach your goals using some certain tools. So we have created a set of digital tools, the Digitally Essential collection of tools that helps you understand from a market research standpoint what your competition might be doing. For example, we are very much focused in our first couple of years on the auto industry because they are an older industry. Far fewer technologies have affected them. There is the CRM back there, there's the telephone recording systems, et cetera. But how they are using the data that's available out there for them to reach their clients and keep pace with times, which is, normal marketing is always happening. People are still pushing flyers and posters, et cetera, and mailers. But the digital marketing aspect of all businesses have accelerated so much that virtually every business can use them. So what we are focusing on in WinnowPro is the idea that you start where you need to start, understand the competition, give tools to analyze what's going on as comparing you with your competition and showing where the imbalances are, where are you losing to the competition, where are you winning, and then putting together strategies that will help you gain the market share that you need at the end of the day. Because we're focused on data, we're very focused on end results as well. So ROI, return on investment, ROAS, return on advertising spend becomes an important part of what we tend to track throughout the life of the groups that we serve. So our digitally essential collection will start with research, then do the strategizing. In WinnowPro, we have utilized sets of AI that are focused on optimizing the use of your advertising dollars, basically. You probably already know, Thomas, that within a given month, we will optimize up to about 400 times a given strategy. So that cannot ever be done by a human being. Your eyes cannot be on every single one of these strategies and implementations of them. And so AI is implemented to do that. And then we go back and look at the results and sit down and figure out, did we set the right targets? Did we achieve the targets that we set? And should we continue in this fashion? Or are there other places that we need to focus and conquer more of the available dollars that are out there for the clients so they can do higher sales or better quality sales, faster sales? Many ways, technology helps do things faster, but in gaining that speed, we are never satisfied because we always want to find out, is there anything that we're missing? Constantly looking at what else could we do? And that's, again, part of the entrepreneurial spirit that we have inside the company that says, we can also do this, we can also do that. So basically, WinnowPro does the job of a full set of marketing in the digital format, from research right up to execution and measuring the results that we've achieved for the clients. And it can be applied to individual clients or service companies like yours that serve clients, and it becomes a B2B2C.
For sure. And I love the way you mentioned the data points or things that you can analyze with AI that the human just can't, right? And within a speedy fashion too, right? I mean, it would sit there and take us forever to probably lift up the hood to see, okay, all the data sets and data points that your AI is looking through and how long will that take a human being, or how long would that take a whole marketing agency to do, and to do it in a quick and precise fashion. I really believe AI, again, is just taking over the world in a grand scheme, the grand scheme of things, but also it does take the human element to come up with this portion of it, to strategize and say, okay, this is what we need to do better. This is what we need to be able to do quicker, to help us gain an advantage, especially against our competition. And I love how WinnowPro goes about that.
Right. So I think we help elevate people's jobs and functions to a level of supervision, because if you were to do this work that we do using our automation and AI, by the time you're finished with one set of analysis, you're already out of date.
Right, exactly.
So it's not easy to sort of do the same job, even because that element of time and speed is so critical in markets. And the adjustment and your ability to adapt to that new speed, which is ever increasing right now in our environment, is very, very important. And without these automation and AI tools, it's going to be very difficult to lead any group, let alone just survive at the back end. So,
yeah, and Clint, you know a lot more about that than I do in terms of how exactly how WinnowPro works, but kind of I don't know as much about it, and I know you touched on some of definitely a lot of the functionality, but just like kind of in a nutshell, how is it working? What data is it looking at, and how is it helping to optimize speed up and make your marketing more efficient?
Okay. So a lot of the work starts with organic versus paid ads. So we separate those two things. We look at social media and your ability to build an audience, retain them, and use them to get your sales and services sold. So we look at the proliferation of digital assets that are created in the market right now. Digital media, you started off with Facebook and then Twitter, and then all of these other platforms are emerging. Each of those platforms has their own algorithms for pushing you ahead or pushing you back, for promoting you to certain audiences, etc. And so understanding each of these has become a science. Now, if you think that you can get away with being on what platform, that is old thinking, because there needs to be a combination of platforms that you tend to reach your various audiences at various times of the day. So not only are the number of platforms that are emerging getting greater and greater, their algorithms are getting much more sophisticated, and they change all the time. So the human element needs to keep up with that change. Then the profile of your clients may also be changing, but just imagine that you have a set profile. Now, how many of these platforms can serve your profile so you can reach those individuals well? And then what time of day do you do that? And you have to collect a ton of data around this to understand that this kind of a person is listening to or is on this particular platform at this time of day, and has also got these other habits that you could also use in digital marketing to reach them. Because as competition grows, everybody may have wanted to be on Facebook, and then all of a sudden you find that your ability to reach those audiences has become minimal because everybody else is bombarding them with information. Then you find out for advertising that if you are advertising to a certain population at a certain time of day, all the other people who are competing with you are doing the same thing. So it elevates your pricing, and then it becomes unaffordable. So all of these things have to be managed with full understanding of the data behind this, and the ability to balance out your approach. And this is more than a human approach. You cannot necessarily do this with just human effort.
Yeah, definitely. Otherwise, you're constantly, I definitely understand what you were saying before, where by the time you do the research yourself, or even with a team, it's out of date, because you're looking at, hey, what's the best time to post on Instagram? Well, first of all, that's just you're just going to get a generic answer, right? Or you're going to get 100 different answers, and you're not going to be able to make any sense of it. You have no idea based on your market, your target, your product and service, I love that. I think that takes a lot of the anxiety and headache out of of marketing, so you can really, or out of digital marketing specifically, so you can really focus on what your message is, testing your message and your offer with clients, and really focusing on that instead of all the other million things that there are to
exactly
to navigate.
And Andrew, there's one more thing that you can do: simultaneous tests, what we used to call them the A/B testing. I mean, you can do this with different creatives to different audiences, different times of day, and you can do this multiple times using technologies that are automated technologies and getting your results. Whereas if you wanted to design every one of these things one at a time and test it one at a time, it would take you forever, and it wouldn't be as effective.
Yep.
Right.
That's awesome.
And I love how David brings, like you mentioned it too, Andrew, like being out of date. I keep, in my mind, I keep thinking about the computer that I went and bought at Best Buy when I was younger. And then when I bring it home, it was the new thing on the block. And then the next day, everybody's like, hey, man, you should have waited, because the one you just bought that's brand new, they're already developing the newer version of it. And it's coming out next month. You're like, what in the world? So it's all, everything, like the speed of just products, the speed of technology. I mean, man, by the time you go purchase something, or by the time you think about something, I mean, somebody's already thought and they're thinking ahead. So the AI, leveraging that is the way to go if you can, for sure.
Right.
Yeah. And you're playing in other people's sandboxes too.
Yeah.
You don't own anything. The only thing that you really own ultimately is your email list, and even that you have to use another, there's another program that you have to use in order to reach people on your list. Right. So
exactly.
But everything else, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, LinkedIn, all of it is, they can change whatever they want, whenever they want. So,
and they're doing that. So constantly, we are constantly monitoring their changes, because it has impacts on the APIs. We tap into APIs for speedy collection of data and exchange. And all of a sudden you find out that, these various things are happening in the background, and you've got to adapt. So our technologies have got to adapt to their technologies. We have to constantly be on the lookout for changes that are happening to these various platforms. Now imagine a single company doing this, because we're doing it for multiple industries. Right. So there is a value to doing this at scale where we do it. And each individual company cannot possibly afford to do the same thing.
It makes a lot of sense. Do you guys, just out of curiosity, do you do anything with Amazon?
Actually, we have several companies within our group, and there are massive projects that are going on with Amazon. I'm not sure how much to talk about them, but it allows another level of comfort for the individuals to buy on Amazon, where instant videos are created with 360 views of what is available. It pulls information from so many sources, which is our DNA, which is collecting all of the information available, pushing it in one area. And the results are massive increases in retention of potential clients to those sites, where they find everything that they want in one go. A lot more than just what is the price and how fast can I get it, and what does it look like. It's a ton more information than that. So basically, instant creation of video assets that are allowed on a given site to sell a given product is the core of that technology. And that's the work that's being done with Amazon through a sister company.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So, David, through your entrepreneurial journey, from the highs to the lows, what do you think the most difficult thing about being an entrepreneur is for you?
The most difficult thing for being an entrepreneur, I think that once you are recognized as someone who solves problems, then a lot of barriers drop. As you can see from my background, I have been in so many industries. So an entrepreneur is not necessarily tied to a given industry because of lateral thinking. Right. So you can always apply the same kind of thought process and problem-solving processes that you have to apply to various industries. In fact, I find that the most rewarding thing for me has always been the application of the knowledge and skills that I have to another industry, not necessarily the same one. It gets a little bit boring, and most entrepreneurs don't want to be bored. So
exactly, just by their nature.
Exactly.
That makes a lot. That makes a lot of sense. So
the most difficult thing I think is that establishing yourself as a true entrepreneur, not as a one-trick pony, basically.
I like that. I mean, the barriers do drop whenever you're able to solve that problem. I really think also the thing is, I think a lot of people have problems getting to that point, right? In some degree. But I think if you can't get to that point, you're not a true entrepreneur, right? Because you always got to find the problem and then the solution. And then you also got to make sure that you position yourself as that solution to that the customer's problem.
Right.
I mean, you got to make sure that product or your service solves their problem and why it's better than somebody else's, right? And
You've got to be better.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
At the end of the day, better. Yep.
Yeah. If you talk to anyone on WinnowPro, they will tell you this is a constant quest. We will not give up on anything. If we're doing it today, we say, how much better could we have done? Where is the next limit that we need to push? So the idea of solving a problem and continuing to solve similar problems that are adjacent potentially becomes really fun, because once you isolate a set of problems, you solve the most important one or maybe the least important one, and then you get to the next one. So those things are very, very important for an entrepreneur to focus on, that constant development mindset of constant change and solution provision.
Yeah, it's so important. Once you figure out that one thing works really, really well, I think it gives you that confidence to start saying, next. Okay, well, what else? Yeah, what else can we do? How can we improve now? I think it is tough in the beginning, where it's like you want to develop and you want to continue to improve and perfect your product, but at the same time, you want to make sure that you get sales first, right? Yeah. So there's this like constant battle. I feel like I have that sometimes with my business partner in a product-based business that I own. And, I'm an engineer, so I like the idea of continuously improving and perfecting our product. But sometimes, we'll get into discussions about features where I'm like, we got to figure out, we got to focus on the marketing and sales. Let's get some sales here. And then we can, really perfect it. But there's that constant sort of back and forth with, you need to spend time on R&D and improving the product, but you can't spend too much because you also have to sell the product. And so there's the kind of a back and forth. I think if you can master that at any level, then it's going to be tough to beat.
Andrew, I think you put your finger on something extremely important. You can waste a lot of time that you could be gaining market share by giving what you believe to be the super perfect product.
Right.
You do not need to do that. In fact, if you get the product to about an 80%, it is time for market to test it for you and then tell you what else they need to add back to it. In fact, people in the software industry have perfected this because you get virtually imperfect first-time products constantly. And there are all these updates that are happening to you all the time. And they figured it out that if we give you something that's good enough, you will adopt it, and then they will improve it over time. And that has been a very successful method for the software industry. And I think it says the same thing. So long as you don't create a failure up front, I think the one thing to be sure of is when you launch a product, it cannot fail. Or if you have specific use cases that you want this not to be used, just like the drug industry says, not for people under the age of 12 or whatever, you want to exclude the people who will cause the failure and make sure that your product is a success up front.
Yeah. Yeah, that speaks to setting expectations, I think, of the product. That's really, really, really important. And if you understand that and have that figured out right from the start, then you're on the same page with your customer, and your customer will respond to that and get that.
Let me expand on that a little bit, because it's really important. And I've focused a lot of our effort on this as well. When you create that product, it is just as important to tell people what it does and what it does not do, what it's meant for and what it's not meant for. And I think this is part of very sophisticated products that we've put out in the past, where we have to help the clients understand the do's and don'ts of whatever they're stepping into. Mm-hmm. Because a lot of times people will push everything to the limit themselves, and they say, okay, this one doesn't work this way. So the train front is really important. As you said, setting expectations is very, very important, to say, you know what, guys, be careful about this, because this was meant to solve these set of problems. It is not going to be a panacea. It's not going to solve every problem that you have. Now, if you tell us that the other problems that you have are serious and good enough for us to invest in, we'll take it up. We'll go back and start looking at developing something that remedies that other issue that you might have.
Yeah. Exactly. But you can't be everything to everyone and try and, people will get frustrated. Even if your product solves the solution you're trying to solve perfectly, if somebody tries to use it for something else, it's like, it can be frustrating and then cause a bad customer experience. Then, you've got other issues where if you just make it clear up front what it's for, what it's not for. I like that. I like that where you're not just saying, hey, this is what it's for, but you're making it clear, very, very clear. Also, this is what it's not for. That's great.
I think it's an important message. I mean, there too, as well. I mean, because I'm in the digital marketing space, so I see a lot of these softwares that have like the 80% solution up front, right? And they go ahead and tell you that, hey,
if they're lucky.
Yeah, exactly. if they're lucky, but they go ahead and tell you that, and they'll give you a roadmap of what they're planning on doing, right? Like, it solves these problems for you right now. And this is where we see it going. And a lot of them that I've stayed with or played around with, they continue to actually stay true to the word, right? And you kind of find in the software space who you can trust and who you can't. You know, there's plenty of people that throw in the towel real soon on software. You thought it was going to be the next big thing, and they throw the towel in too early. But then you have some people that promise you, but also they promise you with actual results that they've had and past businesses that they've been a part of, or actually businesses that they've started and thrived in. And so you could kind of go with some reassurance there that, you know, even if this guy actually does throw in his towel, he's going to make sure that this continues on in some form or fashion. And so there's just so many softwares out there that, again, might not be the perfect solution, but they're aiming to be the perfect solution for you and what they're trying to solve.
Exactly. A lot of software companies tend to either get very well funded or not funded at all. There are some good ideas out there that will not get funded.
Right.
But those companies that will promise you a big roadmap and will not accomplish it most likely have failed in convincing investors to invest further. That's a big problem.
Yeah. You always need that to keep going forward. And so, David, I mean, this conversation has been very eye-opening and just awesome in itself. And I believe me and Andrew could sit here and talk to you all day. But as we wrap up this episode, if you could leave our listeners with one piece of advice, what would it be?
If your listeners are entrepreneurs already, they probably don't need my advice. But I think there are several things that matter to an entrepreneur that are probably useful for anybody who is beginning this journey. I think in an entrepreneur's journey, the first thing that I said, which is focusing on a problem that you can solve, right? Or you're excited about. You really need to be excited and enthused about this. If you're not an entrepreneur. If you can't get excited about it, don't touch it. So step number one. Step number two is test it out in the market. Do really people need this, or is this a nice to have? You really should go after the big needs if you can find them, because a lot of entrepreneurs are doing things that they really like themselves, and they think, I have this problem at home, I'm going to solve it, and maybe there are tens of thousands of people like me, but are they willing to part with their money for it? So testing it in the market is really, really important. And obviously, once you test in the market, you have a solution there. Funding becomes important. So all of a sudden, now you got to go to family and friends to get funding, or some third-party group. Now, that problem solved, then you have the ability to bring the team together that needs to work on this. And if you are trying to create a larger company, one that sustains itself and becomes a useful contributor to the general economy, then you have to have proper teams with a set culture that entrepreneurial culture can propagate itself throughout the company. So then you begin not only just to listen to the market, you need to listen to your own people who are in touch with the market, who will start building the company and build it from its core. So I guess this is not a single message, but I think the journey itself needs to be looked at very, very carefully. And ultimately, I think timing is very, very important. When you look at the pandemic right now, part of what is accelerating the world into the digital economy is the inability to go out there and sort of have face-to-face and you have to go to touchless events, etc., just like we're doing on Zoom right now, rather than being inside a studio, right? So things like that accelerate the ability for us to do things in technology that would not have been absolutely necessary. One of the things we're doing is helping the auto industry get faster into the digital retailing space so that you can actually do your car shopping completely online without ever touching anybody. There are several companies that are already doing that in a narrow format. Obviously, Tesla has done it now as a company, but all the brands need to benefit from this. And how do you do that?
Right.
You go and invent one thing for each brand, or can you create something that all brands can use? So those are the things that I think an entrepreneur needs to think about. What is the market? Are they ready for it? Are they willing to part with their money for it? Is this the right timing?
Yeah. Timing is very important too. And I think one of the hardest things which you touched on there is figuring out is testing. How do you test? How do you get a good idea about whether or not your product or service is going to, there's, value. Yeah, exactly. if it's going to fly. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with, and when to pivot, when to throw in the towel.
Yeah.
So, I think that's really interesting. And there's a bunch of different ways you could do it, but that is definitely something that if you can get more feedback, I think a lot of people are afraid to talk about their idea, especially with products, especially with physical products.
Stolen. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. They don't want anybody to steal their ideas. They don't talk about it. And really they should be, obviously talk to a patent attorney first, but really, you should be figuring out how you can, get some IP, get a patent, or at least get that process started. And at the same time, get it out there, because you think that everybody wants to steal your idea, and then you shout it from the rooftops and nobody pays attention.
Exactly.
And it's actually a lot harder to get anywhere with it, right? So it's I think
very
that's
true,
really critical part.
Well, guys, I think that's a wrap for this episode. And from the both of us, David, we want to thank you for taking the time of your day and joining us and adding value to what we're doing on our podcast.
Thank you very much for having me on, and I really look forward to having the ideas that we've explained over here take off in a bigger way in other broadcasts that you do.
For sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really been a pleasure, David. I'm sure we'll have to follow up with you again and hop on another episode, because I think there's a lot that we could talk about. But so thank you all so much for listening to That Entrepreneur Life. To learn more about what David is working on, check out WinnowPro.com. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe to our podcast, and don't forget to download our free ebook about the success mindset at ThatEntrepreneurLife.com.
Thanks for continuing to support what we do as entrepreneurs, and don't forget to join us next week for another episode of That Entrepreneur Life.
Thanks for listening to That Entrepreneur Life podcast. Be sure to visit ThatEntrepreneurLife.com to join the conversation, access our show notes, and discover our fantastic bonus content. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode as we continue to add value. Until next time.